Alright, welcome to part 3 of the tutorial where we're going to try and refine some of the behaviour of this car. So I noticed when playing around with some of the settings and trying to get this working properly, your front wheels were set to 1.5 and I think the rear ones were set to -2. They should actually be the same at -1.5. You can still play around with those and put them where you want, but ideally, as I mentioned before, it should be fairly symmetrical. The other thing is when you've got all these, the four wheels, is when you select them all you can change these values. You can change them all at the same time, and that's also a good idea, rather than, unless you really know what you're doing, changing any of these values independently of whether it's a front wheel or a back wheel or a right or a left. So the last thing that you'll also see is you may have, when you play it, some weird jumpy behaviour where even when you're going straight it kind of like shoots off to the right or the left. Doesn't always happen, and part of the reason for that is just because of the way the wheel colliders work, and I'm going to show you the trick that took me a long time to find. So on each of these wheels is a wheel collider script. Now if you look at the documentation, it says you can do this inside the car. What you can do is, for each of the wheel colliders, so say for a single wheel collider, if you choose left front, you can do this configure vehicle substeps. And if you look this up in the documentation, there's not a lot of help, but I did look at some of the other vehicle stuff you can get, the other scripts, and what you do is you set this value so that you get more steps, so more accuracy when it's slower, and it can be less when it's bigger. So one of the standard value would be when it's going, so the speed is the first thing, so configure substeps 5 is the speed threshold, and then there's a value for how many substeps below that threshold, and you could do the default physics steps is about 6, so you probably want to bump it up a little bit. Obviously this is, the more you bump this up, the more it's going to cost your your CPU, sorry. So you don't want to put it up too high. In theory it can go up to 255, but you'll see a degradation in performance, particularly if you've got more than one vehicle. So you probably want like a value between 10 or 15 or something like that. When you've got those, that's the number of steps underneath that threshold, and it can be less than that when you're moving a bit faster because it's a bit more stable, so you could change it back to something like 5. In theory that needs only be done once, so just any one of the wheel colliders, and then configure vehicle substeps. And what you should see when you save this is a little bit more stable performance when you're driving the car. You may have seen, and when I set up vehicles before, when I was doing this, it was very jumpy, and it was, even standing still it would jump around, and that was exactly the reason, as the configure vehicle substeps. So you see it's quite fun to drive right now. I'm just going to explain a few of the other little things that you can change to change how it behaves. I'm going to highlight all of these so that I've got them all selected, so I can change things all at the same time. One thing that you'll see, this value is normally set to 0, and if I try and show you, the little dot that you see on the very bottom is where the force will be applied. So obviously when you're in an ideal world it would be applied there, because that's where the wheel touches the ground. And it can cause quite a bit of roll in your car, so as you're driving your car around you'll see that it kind of pitches and rolls, leans to the right and the left. It'll also accelerate and lift up a little bit. The front will lift when it accelerates, or it'll drop when it decelerates. A good balanced car should be about, if you tweak this value, but you can put it up quite a bit. So I put mine up to 1, so it's kind of the center of gravity, just a little bit up, below center of gravity. So you still see a little bit of pitch and roll as it goes, but yeah, it should behave a little bit better with that. The other thing that we're going to do is just get these values tweakable inside of our code, and the easiest way to do that is to create some variables for any of the things that we put in as hard-coded. So this steer angle, we'll start with that one. What we're going to do is we're going to use the range. So this allows us to set an actual slider inside of Unity so that we can set the value to something reasonable, so it can't go below or above that. So the lowest value I probably want would be about 10 degrees, and the highest value I want is probably about 45 degrees. The range is going to be public, and it's going to be a floating point, and we're just going to call it steering range. Steering range. And we're going to set the default value to say 30, and save that code. And where we have this value, this hard-coded value, we'll just use that. While we're here, just do this motor torque. So we're going to use exactly the same thing. We're just going to do the square brackets and then range again, and inside the value we're going to say the minimum would be, say, 500, and the maximum is going to be 2000. Seems quite a lot when I was playing around with it. So I'm going to put Fs, should really put Fs on these ones too, just so that the compiler knows that it's actually a floating point value. And again, we'll make this a public float, and we're going to make it, call it can't really call it motor torque, we'll call it torque, T-O-R-Q-U-E, and we'll give it a default value of, say, 1000. And then, as we did before, we'll just use torque as the value instead of this hard-coded value. When we save this, you'll see back inside of Unity our car script right here now has these sliders that you can bump up and down, and that will affect the behavior of the car. So you can quickly test without having to jump back to code, change things, save it again. You can just tweak the value and hit play and see how it affects it. Now we have put up the center of gravity. You can see the little dot sticking out the top of the wheels, so it should behave a little bit better. With a little bit less power, we get a lot less slip, where the wheels won't wheel spin when we try and accelerate, and they won't slide too much. Some people like to have some kind of drift as well, and what we can do with that is I'll just show you some of the values we can change. So I've highlighted all of these ones. The main one, if you leave these, there's explanations that you can get on the internet for how this friction curve works. But if we look at forward friction, the value you want to change is stiffness. This is the easiest one to change. And sideways friction, stiffness as well. So the sideways obviously is how much it might slip. So for example, if I put the two rear wheels, if I put the stiffness down to 0.5 and hit play, the front wheels are grippier than the rear wheels, and therefore when we start turning a corner, so if we get some speed up and start turning a corner, we might get some slip and it will drift around and slide sideways. You can tweak those values as much as you like and try and get it to something that's approximately controllable. The last thing that I want to show you as well is just the suspension distance and the damping value. So the suspension distance is how much the suspension moves, and this is in meters, so this is 30 centimeters. So if you want it to be more, you could double it easily, and you'll see, 0.6, not 60, 0.6. Okay, there we go. So, best do that with all of them rather than do it with just the one. So it was suspension distance 0.6. So you'll see that now the wheels are a little bit lower, but they'll actually travel a bit more. And you see when you drop now, you've got a lot more travel. And you'll have to tweak this as well, because you'll see that it still might not behave exactly as you want. The last thing that I might do for you is what we'll do is I'll just quickly set up a little arena so that we've got something to look at, and we're going to write a really simple script to make the camera follow it so it looks like a radio controlled car. So I'm going to pause the simulation and I'm going to add a few cubes to the scene so that I can make a couple of ramps and a few things to avoid. Yep, so I've put just one or two ramps around, and what I'm going to do is just create a really simple script to move this camera a little bit. So I'm going to put the camera sort of over in the corner over here, and you're going to be able to see quite a bit of the scene from there, probably about there, and maybe a little bit higher. And we're going to make a real simple script for it. So just going to click on right click and create a new C# script, and we're going to call this camera look at target. And I haven't spelt it right, but feel free to spell it correctly. And open this up. So the camera look at target, we need the actual target. So what I'm going to do is just do a public transform. Oops, public transform for the target that we're going to use, and I'll just call this target. And we'll leave it blank just now. We're going to fill that out in the inspector, and then just on late update. So if you do this on fixed update, you might get a bit of jumping. If you do it on just the normal update, you might also get some glitchy behavior. So late update is just before it renders to the screen, so there'll be no more changes to the scene by the time we've called late update. And all we're going to do is we're going to say that the transform, so this camera's transform is going to look at, and we're going to look at our actual target. We can leave it as a transform, it's that simple. And when that's all saved, we just go back to here, drag this camera look at onto our main camera, and the main camera, you should see the slot here for what thing we're going to look at. So we're actually going to look at the top level transform of that car, and by hitting play now, the camera should automatically just look at the car, so you can start driving this around like a little radio controlled car around the scene, and hopefully you'll have a lot of fun with this very simple car. Now there's lots that can still be done with it. You can tweak the physics all you like. You can change the models, obviously, and one of the major steps would be changing out the models so that you've got proper wheel models and a proper car model. And it's as easy as just literally replacing the meshes, the objects that you have here, with the ones that you've made, and leave the top level car with the rigid body, and you can tweak that weight a little bit if you really want to, but you'd probably leave it approximately the same. And then you swap out the model and ensure you've got a collider with it. And with the wheels, you swap out the wheel model with this cube, and just ensure that you remember to replace the wheel mesh with the one that you are going to use that does not have any colliders on it at all. That should don't scale this car, by the way, and if you scale the top level, you're going to muck around with all the physics. So keep the scale at 1, 1 and 1, and you can scale this mesh as much as you like, and the wheels, they should be at 1, 1, 1 as well, so don't scale that, and each of these, keep those scales at 1, 1 and 1. But if you need to change the wheels bigger or smaller, you can change the radius here of the wheel. So you have a functional car now, and you should be able to make this into some kind of game, and you know kind of how the wheel colliders work and how to apply forces to them. Remember that when you have the wheel collider, any of these wheel colliders, you can look at further information just on the book next to the wheel collider component, and if you do look at that, you might look at things like how you would apply braking force to it, and how and when you would do that. Alright, I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. You should have a simple car now, and feel free to play around with it and put it on terrain if you want to, and change any of those values as much as you like. Enjoy.